Thank you all so much for joining us for the Managing Student Debt in a Recession workshop. Joining us today is Larry Morrison, CEO of College Loan Freedom. He's going to be discussing strategies to help us manage student debt. And I'm going to hand it over to him to get us started. Thank you all.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me, Navina? All right, cool. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I am Larry Morrison, founder of College Loan Freedom. Oops, that's no good. Let's do this, see how that helps. Okay. Good old technology here. Okay, so let me get out of this. There we go. Try it again. There we go. All right. So my name is Larry Morrison, founder of College Loan Freedom. I've been in the student loan industry for 7 years. The company's been around for 5. I regularly teach mortgage brokers, financial advisors, and of course graduate students all over the country about student debt and all of its intricacies. So I also consult on the congressional level to a couple of congresspeople here and in San Diego about student loans, and of course, people affected by them. So my topic is obviously about student loans in the recession, but what I want to do is I'm going to teach on a level to bring everything to a certain point, and then we're going to engage in questions. So if at any time you don't feel that it's the topic's being covered for your specific situation, just wait. I'm going to leave at least 20 minutes for a specific Q&A, and of course the website's there if you ever need to get a hold of me specifically. That is my book, bestseller on Amazon, Student Loan Debt Secrets. Hit bestseller a year ago, and it should be on Audible. It's supposed to be there by now, but I guess everybody wanted to write a book during COVID, so I've been on the wait list to get it uploaded to Audible. Should be by the first of the year, they tell me. We'll see, fingers crossed. All right, so let's dive right in. I know student loans can be kind of a dry subject, so feel free to laugh at all my jokes, and it'll make it go a lot faster, okay? All right, so as of today, if you didn't know this, student loan debt stands at $1.7 trillion spread over 45 million Americans, second only to mortgage debt, which means that next to a mortgage or rent, if you have a student loan, the second biggest expense in the expense column is going to be that student loan. And spread over 45 million Americans means that 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 working people between the ages of 25 and 65 face this problem. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of it, not too much, not enough to bore you, but just to give you an idea of how it affects CARES, COVID, our political climate at this moment. So everything I'm going to say is going to tie into COVID and what possibility of a recession that we're going to. And I'm also going to show you the macro as well as the micro, right? So I'm going to show you what's happening to the nation because I think all of us are aware, including, congressional leaders and people in power, that this is a problem. So if you understand the macro and the micro, you'll understand how your stuff can possibly be affected by policy changes that are coming up, or at least being suggested on the table. That's the goal anyway. So as I said, huge problem, 1.7 trillion. And it really is a ripple effect from the mortgage meltdown, because before 2007, 2008, the student loans were only $300 billion total. I say only like it's a small number, but when you see the 500% plus increase that we've had over the last 12 years, yeah, you can say it's 300 billion is kind of small. So it's a ripple effect of that, because before the financial crash of 08, students or tuitions were heavily subsidized by the states and property taxes. And so when properties fell or prices fell, everything crashed, the states cut funding to a lot of the colleges across the country because they had a lot less property taxes coming in. So then the schools had to hike tuition, right? And of course, since wages have been stagnated since 2000, it doesn't take a financial genius to figure out that if the cost of something far outpaces the way we pay for it in the form of wages, then we're going to have to lean on a debt instrument, which is what happened. And there's some few more things that happened to spike that that number that I'll talk about later on. But the other thing you need to understand is before the mortgage crash of 07-08, student loans were lent primarily by banks and then federally insured, kind of like mortgages are today. And then after the crash, since banks couldn't lend any money, but we couldn't stop people from going to school, the Department of Education itself stepped in and directly lent to the students in the form of what's called the direct loan. So meaning that our IRS tax dollars that we pay in taxes went to feed the Department of Education, well, the IRS, then the Department of Education, and was lent back to us. And as of today, roughly 70% of that $1.7 trillion is directly controlled by the Department of Education itself. And that's going to become important later, and I'll remind you about that. But when it comes to COVID and CARES and whatnot. So basically just remember, there's an old type before the mortgage crash and a new type that is now the primary driver. But let's look at what is really the problem. I mean, these numbers are astronomical, right? $1.7 trillion. But what does it really mean to you and to the people that your predecessors who left school before you? Right now, there's a 30% drop in the entrepreneurship in the millennial generation directly related to student loans, meaning more young people are more risk adverse and don't want to take the leap of faith into that new venture, that new cutting edge technology, or whatever the case may be, to stand on their own because they're coming out in a hole. And that's a huge, huge problem. Home buying trends have shifted from first-time home buyers have shifted from early 30s to late 30s, directly related to student loans because people want to get out of the hole of student debt before they go and buy a house or start a family. And then, of course, for every $1 of student loan debt that someone has, it's a lost $10 in retirement savings, which is why I teach financial advisors all over the country how to help fix that problem. But basically, this money is being siphoned away from the borrower and not being able to go toward the American dream. So it's crippling people. And like I said, the government is well aware of this, and I'll show you their solutions that we can take advantage of today, and we're going to. Okay? All right, so hopefully that thoroughly scared you if you weren't already. I don't know why you'd be here if you weren't a little bit apprehensive about the student loan debt that you may have. But let's look at the nuts and bolts, break it down, so that way you have a good idea of what you're up against and the options that you are facing, right, or have at your disposal. So when you leave school, everybody gets put into the standard plan. Standard meaning it's what everybody gets. It's 120 monthly payments plus interest divided by how much you owe, right? So basically it's paid off in 10 years. Now the rule of thumb is this. You're going to pay basically roughly 1% of what you owe for the entire 10 years, 1% of the debt. So if you borrow $20,000, you're going to pay about $200 a month for 10 years. You borrow $50,000, roughly $500 a month for 10 years. Borrowed $100,000, going to be about $1,000 a month for 10 years. So it looks like that, simple graph, right? Payment over time, just flat level payment. Now, before I start to attack this standard plan, which all of you are going to be put into 6 months after you leave school, after the grace period, and of course we'll talk about COVID and all that kind of stuff and when you can expect to pay and that kind of thing. But typically, sans COVID, 6 months after you graduate, you get put into this and you'll get a bill for this amount, roughly. So the standard plan works to pay off student loans if you never miss a payment. Let me say that again. So if you never miss a payment, student loans, you'll pay off your loans in 10 years, flat, okay? Now, where I differ from most financial experts is not only because I've spent thousands and thousands of hours in student loans particularly, but on this idea, is that the standard plan really only works for people who have below average debt. Right now, or they make a way above average income. Right now, student loan debt on average for the average borrower leaving school is roughly $40,000. Now I know UNLV is better because of their amazing programs and things, but across the nation, since I don't know what you guys have, I'm just going across the nation. Average is roughly $40,000. So if you have less than that, this program may work, especially under 20. But if you have above that, we're going to look outside the box. But either way, you can take advantage of anything that I'm telling you, right? So just remember, if you take nothing away from what I just said and all my ramblings here, below average, you can look at the standard plan. Above average, we need to think outside the box, okay? So when you hear like the Dave Ramseys and Susie Ormans and financial professionals out there, they're always going to tell you to get out of this debt as fast as possible. I respectfully disagree. I believe it depends on what you owe and what career you're going into. Because here's what happens to a lot of people when they want to pay this thing off in 10 years and be a good debt borrower, right? But life gets in the way. So let's imagine that this hypothetical student leaves school, they get put into the 10-year standard, and in this case, let's say it's, they borrowed $50,000, they're paying $500 a month, and let's say they've been paying for 5 years. They're halfway to their goal. But then life happens, right? Maybe they, are like 73% of college graduates who don't go into the field they studied for. That's undergrad. I know I'm talking to the graduate students here, but on average, 73% don't go into the field they studied for. Or let's say they run into an unexpected expense. Maybe they have a car accident, or they have kids unexpectedly, get married, that kind of a thing, or they're running into a crazy recession forced on by a pandemic. So what happens to most people is when they run into financial trouble, this was a study done in the Wall Street Journal in 2017 that said when most people run into financial trouble, the first thing they stop paying is their student loan. Because consciously or subconsciously, people understand that you can't repossess an education, right? So their money goes toward food, clothing, and shelter first to keep the lights on and their kids fed. And student loans get put on the back burner almost consistently across the board. So and that shows today, by the way, with only 11% of borrowers are paying their student loans right now. Now, of course, they don't have to. Interest is frozen, payments are frozen, but still, that's pretty telling. But anyway, all that said is, let's say, again, that you are paying for 5 years, hypothetically, halfway to your goal of 10 years to pay this off, and you run into some kind of trouble. So most people are going to call the Department of Education, and real quick, everything I'm talking about here is the federal stuff. So 90% of all student loans are federal, and I'm explaining to you the federal programs and federal plans. And I have a slide at the end that will talk about private for those people who have it and how it plays into this. But if you understand the federal system, you understand the lion's share of student loans, okay? So again, let's say they run into financial trouble. They're paying for 5 years, halfway to their goal. They run into financial trouble. The first thing they're going to do is going to call the servicer or the Department of Education and ask for help. And the Department of Education or the servicers are going to put the borrower in either deferment or forbearance. And in my opinion, deferment and forbearance are scams being perpetrated in the American public today. Again, everything I'm saying is my opinion. I'll have to take it as gospel. But that is because I say that because student loan debt interest is calculated much, much differently than any other type of interest in the financial world. It's calculated on what's called simplified daily interest, which means it runs every single day. It also has the ability to compound through an instrument called capitalization. Now we can stop the compounding from happening, but for the average person who doesn't know it even exists, they won't know that they are saddled with the most aggressive interest and it compounds, okay? So if you ever play with a compound interest calculator and have the ability to delineate between daily, monthly, yearly, and term, you'll see daily is the most aggressive. But let me give you an extreme example, because what happens to a lot of people, again, is they want to pay, but they run into this problem of interest. So again, let's say again, and I've said it like 4 times right now because I keep coming back to it. Just bear with me. So they're paying $500 a month. They've been there for 5 years. Let's say they take a year off of paying in forbearance or deferment, and they come back and start paying again. It's like they've only been paying for 2 years, not 5. That's how much gets recouped in student loan debt compounding interest, okay? Plus, student loan debt is front-loaded. What that means is you're going to pay mostly interest for the first 5 years of a 10-year loan. If you didn't know this, mortgages are the same way. So the first 7 years of a 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay mostly interest. This is because the bankers figured out that people move or refinance on average every 7 years. So if they did it that way, they front-loaded it, they would make all their profit up front, and the principal will remain intact for the next person to refinance, okay? Well, student loans are similar to that, and that's why I call it a trap. But, so let's say you pay and you pay and you pay, you take a break, you pay and you pay and pay, take a break, and you can do this over and over again until you die or you give up. Let me give you an extreme example of this, and I recognize that this is an extreme example, okay? I have a client, her name is Davis. She graduated college in 1996, 24 years ago, with $60,000 worth of student debt. And this was her life. This was her debt cycle. She paid when she could, and she didn't pay when she couldn't. She fell into default. She went through a divorce, became a single mother of 3, had multiple job losses. But again, she paid when she could afford to pay, and she didn't pay when she couldn't. She's probably paid the $60,000 that she originally borrowed back. But today, the government says she owes $320,000. That's what can happen over a 24-year compounding interest cycle if you fall off the wheel. This is what I call like the hamster wheel of debt, or the student loan debt trap. So this is what we're going to avoid like the plague, all right? Like I said, it's an extreme example, but it's what's possible. And when I did the research for my book, what I found is, of course, when I wrote it, it was only $1.5 trillion, but of the 1.7, let's just say, of the $1.7 trillion that's there today, only 1.1, 1.2 is actual principal. $500 billion of the total is interest only. All right, so that's what we're kind of up against. So let's look at that plan. And again, I just want to say, if you never miss a payment, the 10-year standard plan that you're given will work. But if you have a high amount of debt or you're running into a recession right out the gate, then we probably want to look at something else, okay? So the first solution that I want to talk about, the outside the box, if we said standard, 10-year was plan A, let's look at plan B, or the outside the box plan, all right? First thing I want to talk about is a program called income-driven repayment. It's a payment plan just like it sounds. It's based on your income, not on the amount of debt that you owe or the interest or the term. So it's just on your income alone. And it's coupled with student loan debt forgiveness. Now, before I go further, I get this question at the end all the time, so I like to nip it in the bud. Student loan debt forgiveness is real. It's in the College Cost Reduction and Access Act of 2007. It was also added onto by the Obama administration under the HEAL Act, commonly known as Obamacare. On top of that, so it's in the law, and on top of that, it's in the promissory note of every single direct loan borrower, meaning if you took out a loan with the Department of Education, in the fine print, it spells out, if you follow all these things that I'm going to show you, the loans must be forgiven. So it's in the law and it's in contract law, all right? So it is very real. Now, that being said, it's not like what a lot of people think, especially with all the campaign promises flying around. Student loan forgiveness isn't like you just fill out some paperwork after you graduate and the loan goes away. It's actually more like a timeline or a clock. And so no matter how much you pay while the clock is running, and no matter how much is left over when the clock runs out, the rest is completely forgiven, all right? So let's just look at a kind of a hypothetical to get these ideas squared away. There's 6 different forgiveness plans on the federal level, all right? And so the only differences between all 6 is how much time is on the clock until it kicks in. The tick marks at the bottom of the screen there on the timeline directly correlate to each forgiveness plan. So if you were defrauded by your school, which I know is nobody here at UNLV, or you're permanently disabled, you get your loans forgiven right away. No waiting, no time on the clock. If you work as a teacher, you'll get partial forgiveness, only partial, after 5 years of teaching consecutively at a Title I school. If you are working for a nonprofit or government entity, or in the UC, university system, nonprofit system, you get your loans forgiven after 10 years of payment. This is the most common, most well-known, called public service loan forgiveness. And then when President Obama came in 2009, he opened up forgiveness for everybody else after 20 or 25 years, depending on the ages of the loans. What that means is every single person with a federal student loan qualifies for forgiveness, It just may be that there's, no forgiveness at the end of the clock left over. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's say instead of paying this crazy high, $500 a month, we look at income-driven repayment, and we're able to lower that $500 a month down to $50 right off the bat. Let's say that somebody just graduated. But since it's going to be tied to the borrower's income, it's going to fluctuate up and down with their income, right? So maybe it starts out low because we get to it right after graduation, and then it goes up when the income goes up, and then maybe it dips down when they have kids or get married, and then it'll fluctuate like that. And then toward the end, ideally, you'll be able to afford your crazy high student loan monthly payment because maybe the kids are out of the house, or you worked your way up the corporate ladder, and you're making good money, or whatever. So ideally, the best way to work this solution is to leave as much money as humanly possible left over at the end of forgiveness. Basically, we push the debt off to get as much debt forgiven as possible and save all that money in the green squiggly line, okay? Before I go further, I am not one of those people who says you shouldn't pay your student loan. That is not who I am. I'm not one of those guys that's like, default on it and we'll settle it and all that kind of stuff. No, definitely pay your student loan. What I am saying to you is this. In the law, in Congress, what the lender has said is this. Imagine that you went to Bank of America and borrowed $50,000 and they told you only have to pay back $25,000. Would you pay back the full 50, or would you pay back the 25 that they asked for? Because if you told me you pay back the full 50, I think you were slightly insane. That's not financially logical, right? Well, the lender of 90% of all student loans, pretty much, has said that you don't have to pay back the whole loan. What they have said is this. In the code, it says, we are willing to take a portion of your income over a large chunk of your working years. And if that doesn't fully satisfy the loan, we'll eat the rest. All right. So before I go further, again, this might not work for everybody, but if you have average or above average student debt, this will work amazing. All right. So let's do some case studies so that we can flesh these ideas out. All right. So the first one is Katie. She's a teacher in Southern California, Torrey Pines High School, and she graduated college $55,000 worth of student debt, and she was paying about $550 a month. So we worked on it. We used income-driven repayment and forgiveness. We're able to set her up in the 10-year forgiveness program because she works as a teacher at a Title I school, at a public school, so she works for the government technically. And we're able to lower her payment from $550 a month down to $175 a month based on her income and family size and what the Department of Education was willing to take. So since, she's not going to get giant raises because teachers don't get paid like that, she's going to pay about $175 a month for 10 years, saving all that money in the green squiggly line. So she saved $375 a month, and it'll save at least $35,000 with forgiveness, okay? So that's kind of how public service works and the kind of the microcosm of the whole thing. But let's look at somebody who maybe is a new grad. This is Jason, and doesn't have that much debt, right? So this is Jason. He went to school. He borrowed $22,000-ish, and his whole goal is to become an accountant, or he is now, but he wasn't when we first started. So he was paying, like the government wanted, the standard payment was $250 right out the gate, right? And we were able to lower his payment down to $0 a month because he couldn't find a job for the first 3 years after school. He was working as a bartender and making, not giant money or anything. So we lowered his payment down to 0, and we kept it that way until he finally got his accounting job. Now he's making 60 grand a year. So we have to keep it low for a good chunk of time. And then when he started making good money, it jumped up. All right. So he didn't actually see forgiveness after 20 or 25 years because he doesn't work for an accounting firm that's part of the government or a nonprofit. He actually paid it off in roughly, he's going to, I should say, because we're still, I think he's 5 years in now. He's going to pay it off in roughly 12, 13 years. So he's not going to see any forgiveness. He's actually going to pay it off. The income-driven plan just helped him not have to deal with the debt until he was ready and could afford it. Now, before I go further, yes, you will pay interest by not paying on the student loan right out the gate. But what we're essentially talking about is paying interest or renting the debt a little bit, paying a little bit of interest just for the time to get on your feet. And then when you can afford to pay, you can pay, all right? So I hope that kind of clears up how income-driven repayment can help people with a smaller amount of debt. Because what it is, it's really just kind of a temporary stopgap solution until you can get your things under you. And then when you can afford to pay, then you can start to pay off at the big chunks at either what they're asking you to or more, depending on your financial situation. All right. And then let's look at Terri. So I put this slide in because so many people are facing Parent Plus loans right now. Maybe not anybody on this call, but maybe your parents had taken on some stuff for you or other siblings. So this is Terri. She took out $90,000 for her daughter to go to USC, Southern California. I don't know if you know this. USC is kind of expensive, but she was paying $1,200 a month. And she came to me and she was pretty broken up. She was like, I don't know whether to pay the mortgage or the student loan. So before, I told her, before we get any drastic anything going, let's see what you qualify for, right? And I wanted to put this slide in too, because in my book, it's called Student Loan Debt Secrets. And besides interest and a couple other things I talk about, Parent Plus loans are one of the most highly guarded secrets in the student loan industry. Not many people talk about getting them into the best forgiveness plans and best payment plans, okay? All right, anyway, enough tooting my own horn there. All right, so we were able to lower her payment down to $150 a month. And, she's a marketing person. We don't have a crystal ball on what she's going to make over the next 20 years, but if it's slight fluctuations or increases, we'd save about $1,000 a month. We'll probably save her roughly $50,000 with student loan debt forgiveness, okay? So let's jump in. I know we had some questions about public service loan forgiveness and how that works. So for any of you that's going to stay in the college system, maybe work for the colleges, or going into social work or any kind of government work, or being a teacher, or maybe working for the hospitals as a frontline worker, because 80% of all hospitals are nonprofit. I want to explain a little bit about public service loan forgiveness. That's the 10-year program that your loan's forgiven after 10 years of being in an income-driven repayment plan. So you have to pay based on your income, and then after 10 years, whatever's left over is forgiven, okay? So with all of these plans, it's important to remember one thing. The government is essentially giving away free money in the form of forgiveness. So of course, if the government's giving away free money, they're gonna make you jump through a ton of hoops, which is why my book is so thick. I'm the only one laughing at that. All right, I'm kidding. So the hoops for public service loan forgiveness are about 5 of them that are hard, and it gets a bad rap because of the hoops. There's a lot of bad press around public service loan forgiveness because the Department of Education didn't tell the American public about the hoops until it was already 10 years past and people went and tried to apply for it, okay? So here are the hoops for public service if you're going into that sector. 1, you have to have the right type of loan, which means it can't be the old style loans before the mortgage meltdown. It has to be the new style loans directly lent from the Department of Education. You have to be in the right payment plan. You have to be in an income-driven repayment plan the entire 10 years, for the most part. Because that's the only way you're going to save money, if it's lower than what the 10-year standard would be and we leave money left over to be forgiven. So you have to be in an income-driven plan. You have to be working for a nonprofit, 501c3, or certain other nonprofits that have to do with certain sectors of the country, like public health and stuff like that, safety. Or you work for the government, and you have to do that at least 30 hours a week consecutively. Not consecutively like you have to work 10 years at the same job consecutively, but you have to be working 30 hours a week each week in that month to get that payment counted, all right? You have to be the right servicing company, and you have to do the paperwork every year to get the time counted. So there's a bunch of hoops, and the reason why 98.5% of people get turned down is because they don't know the hoops, okay? And I'm trying to change that, and that's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you guys. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know. Mortgages, like I said, I teach financial advisors and mortgage brokers. There is a way to get around if you guys are really wanting to buy a house soon, and you don't want the student loans to interrupt that. There's a couple of different ways to get around the underwriter's guidelines, or I should say use them to maximum efficiency, so that we can get through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, FHA. There's different strategies to make sure that the student loans don't hang you up in closing, or hang you up on your debt to income ratio on buying a home. Credit. None of the things I talked about with solutions of income-driven repayment, lowering the payment, setting up for forgiveness, none of that stuff will affect credit negatively. For the most part, there's always caveats, especially when you have a giant amount of debt. It's a little bit tricky. But for the most part, it will not affect your credit. And we actually do have a program at College Loan Freedom to remove student loan debt from credit reports permanently, but I don't want to plug my services. I want you to learn. So this is a question I get a lot. What happened, and it'll lead right into what we're going to talk about with COVID and CARES and the political system and all that. So what happens, Larry, if there's changes to the laws, to the programs that you just spelled out? Well, if you get in, and most likely, if you're graduating soon, spring, or you're graduating by May or whatever, you'll be able to get into these programs, and any changes will affect new borrowers in the future. So you're literally grandfathered in, and what would happen is, because you've already taken loans, like let's say you don't graduate for 3 more years, which I don't know why you would be watching this unless you're just stressed about your student loans. But let's say you don't graduate for another 3 years, and let's say you have a $50,000 worth of student loan debt now, and you need to take out another 20. So if there was changes in the laws, they would only affect the loans that were taken out after the laws were changed, right? So everything that you have now that I just talked about would be covered, or grandfathered into everything I just talked about, okay? And the way law changes happen is this. If the programs are worse, like they take certain programs away, you'll be grandfathered in and get the best. If they make improvements, like I'm obviously hoping that they do, then you'll also get to take advantage of the improvements, okay? And yeah, and so let's talk about COVID, and then I'll talk about kind of what we should, look at as far as what your particular situations are. And of course, I'll have time for Q&A. I think plenty of it. Okay, so with COVID, March 27th, the CARES Act was signed that stopped all payments and interest on direct loans. So remember, the old style loans were lent by banks before the mortgage meltdown. Those were FFEL loans, they're called. And then the new style were direct, meaning everything was lent directly from the government after that. So no banks were involved. So CARES and COVID and anything that happens with the government, they can just easily stop payments on those loans because they're in control of them. So the direct loans are the ones that were stopped payment, stopped interest, but the old ones lent by banks were not. So they were left out in the cold. So were private loans. So a lot of people are having to struggle to pay those right now because they weren't under that. They're not under the jurisdiction of the government. Okay. So what is going to happen in the future? Obviously, I am not a political, guy, guru, whatever. I can only look at the tea leaves that I see when it comes to student loans. And what I think is going to happen is this. More than likely, President-elect Biden will stop payment and keep the stop payment going. Right now, current President Trump, the stop payment on the direct loans is ending on December 31st. And people will have to start paying again in January. Probably right after Inauguration Day, President-elect Biden will continue the stoppages on direct loans, no payments and interest due, I'm guessing until COVID is over is what he's pretty much indicated. So probably all of 2021 or whenever, we get a vaccine and all that kind of stuff. That's most likely, I would give that a 90% chance of that's what's going to happen. Now, on the campaign trail, he's talked about forgiving up to $10,000 for everybody of student loans. I would love to see that happen. That would help so many people. Right now, roughly 40% of all borrowers have under 20 grand. So doing that would greatly help a lot of people. However, since they're not having to pay, I would bet that they would wait to do that till it's a boost in the economy, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line. That's just my hypothetical. Now, as we're looking at going into a recession, most likely, I hope you're taking away the fact that if you have federal loans, you can base your payment on your income. So if you have low income, no income, if you're having to take a job at like a grocery store, an Amazon fulfillment warehouse, or do something like that just to get by, the income-driven repayment and forgiveness are there for you as stopgap measures, even if COVID doesn't like cover all of the recession. What I mean by that is, let's say COVID's over by next year, but the recession runs 2 or 3 years, you can still use income-driven repayment to make sure that the student loans are not a burden to you until you get on your feet financially, okay? That is not gonna go anywhere, trust me. Income-driven repayment and forgiveness, to me, are like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. They are not a clear solution to the whole crisis, but it's better than nothing, right? It's the best we got, and it really can help in times like this when people are feeling the pinch in income, especially, and in job loss and things like that. That says it. So use income-driven repayment until you can no longer use it. What that means is until your income is really above calculation where you need to start paying something back, use it as much as you can. Now, again, if you have a smaller amount of debt and you want to start getting after it to get it off your back sooner, great. But there's no rush. Yes, you'll pay a little bit in interest, but this is the only debt that I'm aware of, and I've been in the financial industry for a decade. This is the only debt that is flexible with your income. Credit cards, car loans, houses, they do not care. So might as well take advantage of it while you can, and make sure that you keep a house, roof over your head, and all that good stuff. All right. So lastly, before we jump into Q&A, what if you have private loans? Like I said, only about 10% of the entire 1.7 trillion is private. But if you have them, what I suggest is, if you have a combination of federal and private, you want to lower the payment on the federal to feed the private, because private student loans do not care about COVID. There is no stop payment. There is no income-driven repayment. So if you're with Sallie Mae or SoFi or any of those Credible or any of those kind of companies, Discover or Wells Fargo, if you're with any of those kind of companies, they don't care at all about COVID. They want their money. So you're going to have to feed that beast somehow. So I say lower the federal payment and help feed that guy. But if you're stuck with all private, then unfortunately there's not a whole lot that can be done. Again, that's my book there. If you want it right away, go ahead and go to Amazon, Student Loan Debt Secrets. But what I was thinking, Avina, Liz, if you want to take down a list of people who want the book, I'll send a big box over to the graduate college. You'll have to sanitize them, of course. But I'm more than happy to donate, a big box of books for anybody who wants them. Okay.
Thank you so much, Larry.
Yeah. All right, that's it. Anybody have any questions? This is the fun part where we get to get into the minutia of it. If anybody has any questions about their particular situation or anything like that.
So I got a question sent to me in chat. Somebody asked if you can speak a bit about disabled veteran forgiveness.
Sure. So with the disabled forgiveness, specifically with veterans, you have to be 100% disabled by the VA. So it can't be 90, can't be 95. I think it goes in 10 or 5 increments. I can't remember. But you have to be 100% disabled by the VA. And if we get a letter that says that, the government will forgive all the federal loans almost right away, within 3 to 6 months. Now, if let's say you're 90% disabled, and they're not able to get you to the full 100, but your doctor is willing to sign off on the fact that you can't work, because remember, that program is for people who can't work, right? So if the doctor is willing to sign off on the fact that you can't work and you will not be able to work due to your disability for the next 5 years, they will take the doctor's note, so to speak, a form that the doctor fills out, but they will also cross-reference it to your income through your IRS taxes for the next 3 years after it's forgiven. So you literally have to be disabled and not making any money, or below a certain threshold. I believe it's like below 25,000 a year, because it's for people who can't work anymore. But hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Keep them firing away, gang. I'm here for another 17 minutes, at least. Nothing? No, did I do such a good job? That means I either did such a good job that I preemptively answered all the questions, or everybody's asleep or watching TV at this point. So, nothing?
Don't be shy, everyone. You can, if you want your questions to be anonymous, just please chat me and I'll ask on your behalf. Or you can just unmute yourself and ask any questions you have.
Then I'm just going to rant until we hear a question. So before I forget, if you take nothing away from what I just said, besides obviously income-driven repayment and forgiveness is there for you through the recession, is never refinance your federal student loans into a private student loan. That's a big problem that I see happen with people who just don't know the difference. And so they'll see these giant, ads from like SoFi or Credible or Lemke. I mean, SoFi even has a stadium they're building down in LA. And it's like, you see this stuff where it's like, oh, you could save a little bit of interest. Yeah, but you give up so much in the realm of income-driven repayment and forgiveness. So do not refinance federal student loans into a private student loan for any reason. If you have private loans and you want to refinance those into staying private, obviously, then go right ahead. But be very leery of companies that promise lower interest. Interest is not as important as the flexibility for an economic recession like this one.
So we have a question. How does having student loans affect my credit score and ability to go out and make purchases? Let's say I'm looking to rent or purchase a condo house, car. Is having a student loan to my name different from having another kind of loan?
Great question. Tough to answer, but I'm going to do my best. So it is going to affect it's not going to affect your score so much, because score is fickle. It's based on a number of different factors. They want on time, they want length of debt, all that kind of stuff. So score is one thing that's no one can really pin down. But how it's going to affect your credit is through the debt to income ratio. So when lenders look at you for a house or a condo or a car, well, car they're a little bit lax, but or a credit card or whatever, they're going to look at the debt to income ratio. So if you have a high amount of debt versus how much income you have, basically what that shows is how much you can afford to pay on the house, the condo, or the car. So if you have a high student loan debt, but your income is kind of low, then that's going to be a problem for getting the things. It's right now the number one, well, before COVID, I should say, in January, but the number one reason people were getting turned down for houses was because of student loan debt. It's because it affects the debt to income ratio, and it shows that you can't afford it, which is why I work with so many mortgage lenders on showing them how to use income-driven repayment to report instead of all the other ways that the underwriters want. So anyway, long story short, it will affect your debt to income ratio. The score is kind of its own animal, but if you can get it removed, you should. Anyway, but other than that, when is it treated differently than any other type of debt? The thing is, like if you're going to go rent an apartment, let's say, most landlords know that student loans are to be treated with kid gloves, right? Like they're not the same as every other type of debt because it's such a giant problem. And nationally, every, basically, definitely commercial, but residential landlord understands that no one has to pay their student loans right now. So, so it might come up in conversation, definitely. But if you can get into an income-driven plan, you should be able to show that to a landlord or, like I said, cars, they usually don't care. But it just depends. Like if you're buying a $100,000 car, then they're going to care. But like if you're going to a used car lot, they don't care. But like if you're going to if you're going to rent somewhere and you show them like, hey, I was approved for an income-driven plan for $30 a month or whatever. So don't look at that giant, debt number and hold it against me. They'll usually understand that. But mortgage lenders have a fine guideline that we have to follow, that they need to see a certain like pattern of documents to get through the underwriting process without that giant debt holding it against you with debt to income ratio. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So our next question is, can you refinance a private to a federal loan?
No, I wish. That would be so awesome. No, unfortunately not. The threshold is given at the financial aid when you first borrow, right? So there's only so much they give per borrower per semester per whatever type of loan, graduate or undergrad or whatever. So they won't go beyond that threshold. So no, we can't turn a private into a federal, unfortunately.
Thanks, Larry. So I just got another question in the chat. And this says, if I have credit card debt from being an undergrad that I currently can't afford with my stipend, is it better to try to refinance them or pile on more student loans to help me pay my monthly credit card bills?
Wow. Good question. I appreciate the honesty. Okay. That's a tough one. So let's look at the pros and cons, right? So okay, so let's just say we borrow more credit card or we get more credit card debt to pay your monthly bills because you can't afford it. What's the con of that? The con is the credit card interest is sometimes upwards of 21%, right? And so you're going to be paying mostly interest on that until you can pay far and above what you owe. So, and of course, the speed in which you can use it and things like that, that's a bad thing. And then if you look at the con of getting a student loan to pay the credit card, the student loan is a little bit, it hangs around a little longer. It's a little bit more difficult to get rid of. And what I mean by that is you can't bankrupt it. So like, let's say you ran your credit card bills up really high and you really got in a tight spot and you need to file bankruptcy, the credit card bills will go away. Not that you should do that as an end game, but those, are at least under the fact that you can start fresh if you really, really got down and out. Student loans don't fall in. You can't bankrupt student loans. So they're going to stick around until they're forgiven or paid off. That's the con about taking on more student loan debt is, it might be easier, might get bigger chunks. You might not have to pay it until COVID's over, but you're really going to be banking on Biden to forgive 10 grand if that's, how much you need to take out to cover yourself. Or you're going to have to bank on forgiveness, or you have to really bank on the fact that you're going to make more money eventually with your career. So it's really kind of a shell game. It's 6 one way, half dozen the other. Which con are you willing to deal with? Because if you take on more credit card that they don't care about COVID. They don't care about, some do, but most don't. They don't care about the fact that you're in school. They don't care about, how long it's going to take you to get a job. They want their money right now. So it's really what beast or dragon do you want to slay? The one that needs it right now, the one that needs it later, but you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. That's a really tough question to answer. I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. I could go either way, because for me, knowing all I know about debt, and I don't want to give you any false impressions here, but like, if it was me, I would probably take on the credit cards because I know I could settle with them if things got really, really bad. You can't settle a federal student loan. Plus, you don't want to try to defraud the government at all. That's tough. So yeah, if it's really 50-50. Maybe I would say 51 to the credit card, 49 to the like, you know, if it was 50%, 50% to the student loan. But it's really up to you on which way you want to attack the repayment, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you guys need anything else, I'm always available at collegeloanfreedom.com. The book is there. I'll make sure Navina and Liz in the graduate college, you get a stack of books that you can have access to if you need, you know, step-by-step instructions on how to do it yourself. Okay.
And thank you so much for that, Larry. I will send out an email to our participants to see who wanted to get a copy of that. So,
For sure.
looks like we don't have any other questions, so I guess we'll wrap it up. But before we do, I just want to extend a huge thank you to you for sharing your time with us today. This was so informative, and it's a very important topic for all of us, whether we're in school right now or we just recently graduated. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us to learn something new. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Appreciate it.